Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, in which three rabbis from Englewood, New Jersey, each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Rabbi Chaim Pupko of Congregation Avat Torah, and I'm joined by my dear friends and colleagues,
Rabbi Akiva Block, Kihilat Kesher,
and Rabbi Daniel Goldberg, Eitz Chaim, the Englewood Steeple.
Listen, friend, just a little smile, a helping hand. We all will find a loving, kind humanity. We must teach our children to treat your fellow friend like they were you. And then we all will find some peace of mind and unity.
Our one pasuk for this week, Parshas Vayeishev, comes from the very beginning of the Parsha, Perek Lamed Zayin, Pasuk Gimel, chapter 37, verse 3. V'Yisrael ohaves Yosef mikol banav. Yaakov loved Yosef from all of his sons, kiven zikunim hulo, because he was a child of his old age. Ve'asa lo kisonas pasim, and he made him a coat of many colors, an ornamented tunic, however you want to translate that. This is a well-known pasuk, a well-known story, the dramatic story of Yosef and his conflict with his brothers, and how his father contributed perhaps to that conflict by showing him favoritism. So, rabbis, what do you have to say?
I'm actually going to hone in on the end of the pasuk. Yaakov gives Yosef a kisones pasim, which we I think all assume means a technicolor dream coat, if I'm not mistaken.
Of course, that's what it means. And we also know all the colors, too.
Yeah.
It's red and
Orange.
yellow and green and brown and scarlet and black and ochre and peach and ruby
impressive.
and violet and all the rest.
Thank you,
Did you see that musical? Did you go and see it?
Andrew
Yes,
Lloyd
I did,
Webber.
of course.
Yeah, I saw it too, but I don't know why this was important to me, but when I saw the ads, it was like, oh, Donny Osmond and Joseph, and by the time it came to Chicago, Donny Osmond wasn't in it anymore, and I felt like...
Donny Osmond was barely alive by the time it came to Chicago.
So we imagined Ketonas Pasim, every single art project our children bring home from school. It's this multicolored coat or cloak of some kind. There's a lot of discussion. What does Ketonas Pasim mean? Does it describe the pattern? Does it describe the material? Does it describe the length, how it fit? Any number of explanations. There's a beautiful Medrash Rabbah, though, that says that Pasim is actually an acronym. It's an acronym for Potifar, Socharim, Yishmaelim, and Midyanim. Socharim is the merchants. Yishmaelim, Midyanim they sell one to the other. Yosef down into Egypt, and then Potifar is the home where he ultimately lands, and then after that into prison. And what I think the Medrash is capturing here in telling us that the Ketonas Pasim is actually kind of a sign of the troubles to come. So I take that to mean something like this. Sometimes we think we're giving our child a great gift, and we're trying to give them every advantage in the world. And that can actually end up being a world of trouble for them. And the biggest gifts we give them can actually harm our children and can have a negative effect. And we have to think about more isn't always more when it comes to what we provide our children with. And giving our children every advantage can be a disadvantage. So I think this captures that. The Ketonas Pasim was, I'm sure, in Yaakov's eyes, the greatest bracha he could bestow and demonstration of love. But it turned out, of course, to be very much the opposite in a certain sense.
It's such an important lesson, not just in terms of child rearing, but also just in terms of how we learn the Torah and how the Torah views itself almost. How this happens a number of times throughout the Torah, especially in Bereshis, where the Torah will reflect in a particular pasuk using imagery or perception of unfolding events. In other words, at the time that Yaakov gave the coat to Yosef, it wasn't any of those things. But it ended up being those things, and the Torah actually reflects on that at the time of the giving of the gift itself. Kind of the timeline of the Torah, the trajectory of the Torah it's not linear in that kind of way. When the Torah says things like Ad Hayom Hazeh, it's basically the Torah reflecting on, and I think using your insight, I think it's maybe the best example of that. But
I think you're saying something really, really interesting. The fact that history is not linear and that it unfolds, so therefore what?
The Torah is not to be read as a storybook in the sense that you're always reading not knowing what happens next. Obviously, there is an element to that, and we should always read the Torah anew, not knowing necessarily how the story unfolds. We read the story of the brothers, knowing that it all turns out okay in the end, but maybe we're not supposed to read it that way.
Right.
But it's not a storybook in the sense that this coat that Yaakov is giving to Yosef as a sign of love, as a sign of affection, as a sign of preference or favoritism, we're supposed to know, even at its giving, that this is something that ended up being detrimental, that resulted in disaster.
Right. If we look at it through the linear approach, so we look at Yaakov and say, like, why are you showing favoritism? This is gonna end badly. Why are you doing this? But we're not supposed to read the Torah that way exclusively. That's what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense. That's beautiful. And what you're saying, Rabbi Goldberg, reminds me of something that Dr. David Pelkins said to us many times. He says one of the greatest afflictions of our generation when it comes to our kids is affluenza, and the impact of growing up in an affluent world. Certainly there are people who struggle, but the baseline, the quality of life for most Jews, most modern Orthodox Jews, is very high, and that has an impact on our kids. And I think that's such an important lesson, especially for today. Really.
We often put these two parts of the pasuk together, and we say, Yaakov loved Yosef more than all of his other children. He preferred Yosef. He favored Yosef. And he therefore gave him a ketonet pasim. The Torah doesn't explicitly say, and he therefore gave him a ketonet pasim. The Torah just says he loved him and he gave him a ketonet pasim. And it's also a little bit difficult to square the way the Torah presents Yaakov's attitude to Yosef with the fact that just a little bit later, Yaakov is exceedingly critical of Yosef. And Yosef, in placing himself above his brothers and foretelling that he will lord over his brothers, Vayigarbo aviv, the Torah says, that he chastised him, he gave him musar. What, you expect me, all your brothers, to bow down to you? Right? Chas v'shalom, almost he says. Ve'aviv shamaris hadavar, the Aliyah ends, that this is the enduring perception that Yaakov had of Yosef. Like, he was upset with him. He was not happy with him. So maybe we can unlink the two halves of the pasuk. Yisrael ahaves Yosef mikol banav. Yosef was his preferred child, and not just Yaakov. Yisrael ahaves Yosef, which is a name which implies or connotes a sense of national destiny. Maybe Yaakov really did think that Yosef was the heir apparent, if you will. V'asalo kisones pasim. As Rabbi Goldberg mentioned, the word pasim is very difficult to translate. And certainly the brothers, their perception was this gift was a gift which reflected that love and that favoritism and that preference. But one of the opinions cited in the Tiskuni, amongst the multitude of opinions that are mentioned as to what the word or the term kisonis pasim means, he says, the Tiskuni does, in his second approach, that pasim is milashon lefayes, pius. Pius, lefayes, is a term that we use to appease somebody, to when you've wronged somebody, you give them, or maybe you give them, you come to them with words, you come to them with gifts in order to appease them, to have them or convince them, persuade them to forgive you. And Yosef, according to this approach, was a troubled child. He was perhaps depressed, he was despondent. Although the Chizkuni doesn't say this explicitly, the way some explain this is he was an orphaned child. He lost his mother at a very young age, and he grew up without a mom. And he needed that softer touch. He needed that extra special treatment. He perhaps needed that tender, loving care that maybe the other brothers didn't. It was a kisones pasim. It was a gift from father to son in order to make him feel a little bit better. That was, according to this approach, that was the intention of the gift. And the brothers saw this interaction, and they saw this transaction, and they saw this gift, and they took it in an entirely, completely different way. For good reason, because Yaakov did love Yosef perhaps more. And what we see from all of this is everyone was well-intentioned. And the only reason why it ended up happening the way it did is because nobody communicated with one another about any of this. A conversation between Yaakov and the rest of his children saying, I just need you to understand the situation. Yosef is an orphan. He grew up without a mom. He doesn't have perhaps that perspective that you have. He doesn't have that awareness of the world that perhaps you have. He perhaps is a little...
Or that sense of safety and security of having both parents.
Having both parents. And he needs a little bit more. It was a kisones pasim. It was meant to be a coat of appeasement, if you will. And this, I think, also explains why the brothers seem to be obsessed with this coat. It's so odd when they see him, and the Torah mentions when they see him, he's coming towards them. What do? They rip off his coat. It's the first thing the Torah says. They rip off his coat. And they bring the coat as the sign. They dip it in blood. They bring it to Yaakov and they say, look, here's the kisones that you gave. For them, this was the sign. This was the symbol. And I think the Torah emphasizes that because of how much of, at least according to this approach, how much of a misperception, a misread of the situation it actually was. And the misread took place because there wasn't any dialogue. There wasn't any communication or collaboration amongst the family about what each child actually needed from their father.
So it's so interesting because I had a very similar idea, but from a very different direction on this pasuk. The Netziv notes that when it says that Yaakov loved Ahav, so the superficial reading is that he loved Yosef more than the other brothers. But that's incorrect. That's not what it means. The Netziv explains that what it means that Yaakov loved Yosef is that they found a common bond. They were very similar. Yaakov saw in Yosef very similar character traits, inclinations, values, and that just naturally brought them closer. And it just happened to bring them closer than the other brothers. But it's not that he didn't love the other brothers, and it's not that he didn't see wonderful qualities and values in the other brothers. And Netziv says, and that's why it says, not Mikol Echav, because it's not that Yosef was the favorite brother of the other brothers. No, he was of his sons, he was the one with which he just grew closest. But what's fascinating about the Netziv is he says that it was based on that relationship that Yaakov gave Yosef the Kisones Pasim, and it resulted in jealousy. And so very similar to what Rabbi Block was saying is that even though the Netziv explains the intentions in a more noble way than just, oh, he favored him. It's not that he favored him. It's just that they had a relationship that developed. Nevertheless, still, the brothers didn't recognize that. Still, Yaakov didn't see that what was an expression of just a relationship would be taken differently by the brothers and cause jealousy and conflict. And for me, the lesson from this, I think, it's a subtle one, but it's an important one. And that is that, especially in relationships and the dynamics we have between family and friends or whatever, that sometimes when something misses the mark, when we say something the wrong way or we do something, sometimes the relationship breaks down because either we blame the person or we blame ourselves and we feel terrible. And obviously we should be responsible for our mistakes. But I think we should also remember that in relationships, because of the closeness, that there will be times when we do things that will have unintended consequences. And we have to recognize that, yes, I'm expressing something powerful to Yaakov is expressing something powerful to Yosef, and that's important. And it got misinterpreted. And that will happen. That's inevitable. And you have to address it, and you have to acknowledge it, apologize for it. But it's not like Yaakov did something wrong, right? There are some situations where you need to do something, and there are other repercussions, and you do your best to prevent them, and sometimes you can't, and they require a certain amount of repair, but that doesn't mean that the relationship is dysfunctional. Relationships, because they're so close, they're vulnerable to offenses, and you have to manage and navigate those offenses as part of the relationship. And when you do, it strengthens the relationship. And so I think that the Netziv makes an observation that's really, really important here.
It's sometimes hard to remember that parents and children are people too. And not just the fact they're people and therefore they're fallible, but the cliche, the well-worn cliche, parents love all their children the same. Obviously, at the core, that's true. But we're people, parents are people who are swayed by human interests and common bonds.
Yeah.
And my father, who just went back to Israel yesterday, he was here for our son's bar mitzvah together with my mother. And they just went back home to Israel. And over the last couple of days here, he kept on saying to me, I'm the one of his children who went into the family business. And
Right.
there's a certain joy and pride that he kept on
Right.
telling me about over the course of these last few days that it was just natural. It's
Right.
and I suppose those kinds of things can sometimes be interpreted the wrong way. I don't think it was in this case, but I could see how there would be that bond between Yaakov and Yosef.
Right.
Just, I see myself in you,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And
I'm sure every parent would agree that they have an unconditional love for all their children. And as their children grow up and they find that the child has things in common or doesn't have things in common or sets on a different path or something, that influences the relationship to a degree. It does. Again, it doesn't compromise the unconditional love. But you're right. Relationships are relationships.
All right, shkoyach.
Shkoyach, everyone.
One thing makes me smile now at last. not a happy ending. A global union anxiously